Hey y'all! Well, we're going to do a video today about this new subwoofer from Aiyima, the little 800X. And they sent it to me as someone that does mostly tube amplifier stuff at my Skunky Designs channel. And they wanted me to test it with a tube amp. And the reason that that works with a tube amp is this is a subwoofer that has high level inputs. And some of the subwoofers, or quite a few of them nowadays, are being made with only low-level inputs. And the vast majority of tube amplifiers, even modern production ones, this is about a 60-year-old one that I just restored, there's no sub out. And so trying to use the subwoofer, if you have speakers that maybe don't have low frequency response down where you want it, it's very difficult. Because the only way to get the signal to the sub is before the amp, and then the volume control on the amp isn't controlling the volume on the subwoofer. And so by using a high level signal or input, it allows you to hook the speaker outputs from a tube amp or an amplifier that doesn't have a sub out to the subwoofer amplifier. And so again, for people that have tube amps, that's the ticket. You got to find one that has these high level inputs. Now it does have speaker outs too. Probably not going to be using those, or I know I wouldn't. I would just be using the high level on the output of the amp to the high level inputs on the speaker. And let me show you what those look like. You can see it's got speaker terminals up here for the inputs, and then these you could hook up to the speakers if it was more convenient, or you can just hook the speakers straight up from your amp and then hook up the high level inputs into this. But it may be more convenient to run the speaker wires from your amp to this and then run the speakers off of these jacks. You can do it either way. Now I don't know if this has a high pass filter as part of the speaker outputs, but you can experiment with that and see if one maybe sounds better than the other. It does have your standard subwoofer controls on the back. You've got the phase switch here that goes 180 out or in phase, and you can test to see if it's out of phase or not by turning the crossover point for the low pass filter powering the sub amp and the sub speaker. If you turn it up to like 250 hertz and then play some music and then flip it, normal and 180, and it'll be real obvious which one's right, because if it's 180 degrees out of phase, it'll cancel the bass response and it'll sound really weird. So that's a good test. And then got the volume up here at the top to match the subwoofer output that you want to your main amplifier and speakers. And obviously down here you hook up the power and there's an on-off switch. So anyway, one other little technical thing on a tube amp, you do have to be careful about paralleling stuff up to the output jacks, because the output on a tube amp is simply reflecting the impedance that's hooked up to them to the tubes. And so if you got 8 ohms hooked up to the 8 ohm tap, you got 5K load on the tubes. If you parallel 2 8 ohm speakers on the 8 ohm taps, and a lot of tube amps only have one pair of taps on them, like an 8 ohm tap, then you're putting 4 ohms on the tap, which makes 2500 ohms on the tubes, and it's going to sound really bad. So it's important to have a subwoofer or something like that that has high impedance, high level inputs if you're going to use it with a tube amp. So that's the technical stuff. It still has low level inputs if you got like a home theater system or these LFE jacks. It's got an auxiliary jack, so you can hook all kinds of stuff up to it. So the pressing question is, what does it sound like? Well, the system that I'm using a sub in my house, my main system, I don't use a sub. I use amplifiers that have wide bandwidth transformers and output, so it'll power up speakers that are wide bandwidth that go down to 40 hertz or below, and I don't really have a need for a subwoofer in my main system. My secondary system that's in my downstairs workshop area where we are right now, it has a smaller, about 3 watt tube amp, and it's got some small Clips bookshelf speakers that roll off at about 80 hertz. And the bandwidth on that amplifier is not super low either, and so it can really benefit from having a sub reinforcement of the low frequency response. And that's where I'm currently using an ELAC sub that I bought about 4 years ago that won a big shootout, and it was the only one in the shootout also that has high level inputs. And so this was a good test for this. It's like, that's a known good subwoofer. Let's see what this 8-inch Aiyima sounds like. And it actually sounds better. It's going to be my new subwoofer in my downstairs system. It's got cleaner bass that's also less muddy. It's tighter, and it's also subtle enough to fit my needs of not wanting like boomy bass. And I think one of the problems with my older subwoofer was it had a rear bass port. It was a front firing with a rear bass port, and it was kind of a confined space that bass port was firing into. And on this sub, it has this side port, and you do have to look and make sure that that's going to work with your space, that there's room to have this kind of going out into the room and not reflecting up against some furniture or up against a wall. And you wouldn't want to put this like, with this being your like entertainment center cabinet or whatever, you'd want to put it on the other side. So, you do kind of need to look at that and make sure that'll work with your space that you're wanting to put this in. But I think most spaces you can figure out a way to do it. And for mine, it worked out great. And it wouldn't have worked on the other side. So thankfully, I got lucky and it was on the right side of the subwoofer. But just make sure that that's the case for you too. But yeah, I know that ELAC was a nice one. And it, like I said, there was a video on YouTube where one of the speaker dudes did like a 5 subwoofer shootout, which I would probably never have the patience to do. And he gave it number 1 or number 2. I think the number 1 didn't have high level input, so I couldn't use it. That wasn't an option. But I've enjoyed that little ELAC subwoofer, but this one sounds better. And I think what's happened is the technology of these little Class D amps has improved to the point where it has improved what these subwoofers can sound like at this, $200-ish price point. And this one does have the latest technology stuff in it. You can look it up on their website or on Amazon. I'll put the link below. And yeah, it's just a really nice sounding little product. I like the trapezoidal shape. That's supposed to help kind of keep reflections to a minimum. It's not a super heavy subwoofer. It doesn't, it's not like a 40-pound cabinet or something. It weighs a little over 15 pounds. I think it's 18 pounds, something like that. But it is substantial enough. And I like the rounded edges. I like the two-tone with the wood grain with the black. And yeah, this one gets a thumbs up from Skunky. It's going to be my new subwoofer for my downstairs system. So I do have one kind of picky complaint. I'm not a big fan of this Aiyima badge up at the top. I mean, I wouldn't wear a t-shirt that says Aiyima on it. Like, I don't have my name tattooed on my forehead. It just seems a little out of place for audio gear to have this big glaring name badge. And I know some of my first amps I built them with like these big Skunky Designs name badges on it. And then I realized that a little smaller, more subtle badge just looks better. And like, yeah, I'd be fine if it had like a little badge down here in the corner, especially if it was like, inset or flush mounted. But this one just seems kind of tacked on. Hopefully it's just some double stick tape glued on the top so I can take it off. And it's not that I'm ashamed of the brand. It just, I don't need my equipment to scream a brand on the front of it. And it just isn't an aesthetically good look to me. So that's really the only complaint. And that's the only complaint I got. That's a pretty small one. So I think you guys will like this. So anyway, if you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to my channel. Please like the video. I've got a whole bunch of other cool audio stuff. I do a lot of DIY stuff. I do, some, tube amp stuff, but I do some reviews of other stuff and turntables and speakers, and I try to have stuff that everyone can enjoy. So hopefully you'll find some content on my channel you like. And until the next video, have a nice day.